Welcome to the Strata demo. I'm James, and I'll be showing you how you can use Strata's Maverics software to automate the modernization of legacy identity systems without rewriting your apps. In this demo, we'll use Maverics to migrate an app from OAM to Azure AD. Now that said, don't worry about which systems we're using. Maverics is flexible and works with any legacy or modern identity system and directory. Whether you need to migrate from Oracle or CA SiteMinder or RSA ClearTrust, Maverics can help. And if you want to move to Azure Active Directory, Okta, or some other modern identity system, Maverics can help. Strata has a unique distributed approach to identity management that we call an identity fabric. The most important things to know about an identity fabric are that you can orchestrate consistent identities and policies across different identity systems from one place by using an abstraction layer driven by a simple declarative API. You can externalize on-premises app access to cloud-based users with a hybrid zero-trust model that unifies identity across data centers and clouds, and you can automate the migration of users from legacy identity systems to modern cloud identity systems, all while your end-user experience is uninterrupted. We'll be focusing primarily on the modernization and migration use case today, but stay tuned for demos of the other use cases. Last thing before we get into the demo, let's review some common legacy architecture and the challenges we all face in our current state. On the left, you have a legacy infrastructure and identity system with existing user profiles and access to policy information. On the right, you have a modern cloud service provider and new identity system. Now, when automating application migrations, you need to do three main things. 1, automate the user identity migration process from the old to the new. 2, leverage the new identity system's authentication and access capabilities. And 3, migrate the legacy application without rewriting it, without disrupting the user experience. On the right, you can see that Maverics allows you to perform identity orchestration through the configuration of simple app gateways and migration gateways, which automates the identity and access policy synchronization process. Maverics also provides session abstraction capabilities that enable you to leverage the new identity system's authentication providers using a range of session types, including SAML, OIDC, headers, and more. As a result, Maverics is a faster, more flexible, and cost-effective way to migrate your apps. Okay, let's start with the demo. What you have here is the Legacy Identity System Oracle Access Manager, often known as OAM. Within Oracle Access Manager, we have an application domain called PDDemo. This application domain contains our Sonar application that includes several protected resources, including dashboard, cost centers, projects, and reports. I want to highlight the authorization policies for this application. If you go to the responses, you'll see that we're setting the last name and first name as part of header responses so that the application can welcome the user. We're extracting and retrieving the names from the currently integrated OAM directory. Here, you have the modern identity system, Azure AD. Notice that we have some default users here, but we are missing one important user, and that's our demo user for today, named Alan Adkins. The very first use case we're going to demonstrate is the automated identity migration from OAM to Azure AD using our migration orchestration flow. Now, what you just saw here is a login request for the Sonar Systems application. Maverics has determined that the user hasn't been migrated yet, and therefore directed the authentication to Oracle Access Manager to verify who the user is. Next, let's go ahead and log in as Alan Adkins and authenticate. Once I authenticate, Maverics will know who the user is. Behind the scenes, Maverics runs the migration gateway. Now I'll show you what that looks like when we review the YAML configuration. The migration gateway automatically migrates the user into the Azure AD tenant. Let's take a look at Azure AD now, and you can see that Alan Adkins has been migrated in a just-in-time fashion from OAM to Azure AD. Now that I've migrated the user to Azure AD, we'll show Maverics' session abstraction. Session abstraction is what allows you to delegate the authentication into Azure AD. In essence, it lets you authenticate through Maverics and then have that session pass to your app using what's known as last mile integration. Session abstraction can also send header-based information and attributes to the application. Now shortly, you'll see the user being orchestrated by Maverics into the Sonar Systems application, and the application will receive the user and display the user's first name and last name. Let's go ahead and show the session abstraction now, and there you have it. The orchestrator said, oh, I see that Alan Adkins has been migrated to Azure AD, therefore, I'm going to direct the user's authentication to use Azure AD to authenticate the user. So let's go ahead and authenticate as Alan Adkins. And there you go. The user seamlessly accesses the app using the Maverics App Gateway. You can see that I'm welcomed into the application as Alan Adkins. Now there's more to come on the App Gateway later when we review the Maverics configuration. Next, let's take a behind-the-scenes look at how this is configured. Now what you see here is the Orchestrator's configuration. Maverics uses an easy-to-configure YAML-based model that is very similar to Kubernetes. The configuration that I want to highlight is the OAM to Azure AD migration. Maverics uses a declarative model to define that when the user attempts to access the Sonar app, migrate her from the source, OAM, to the target, Azure AD. The migration gateway declares that the OAM LDAP connector should be used as the attribute provider that supplies the user profile attributes needed to create a valid user in Azure AD. The migration gateway makes it easy to map these attributes across the completely different schemas or namespaces of these two identity systems. It's that simple. Now I'd like to highlight app gateways. App gateways are the way that Maverics performs the last mile integration into the application. So in this case, Sonar systems. A few important things to highlight about the app gateway. First, app gateways allow you to define one or more IDPs to be your authentication and session provider. Now this is important for enforcing policies where you use one IDP for authentication and a second IDP for, say, a multi-factor challenge. Second, you may have one or many attribute providers. Now this is important if you want to add more attributes than you can get back in a claim from your authenticating IDP. And third, as you can see here, the app gateway allows you to easily configure any header or header name and determine where the header value is coming from. Now in this example, the app gateway gets its attributes from the claims returned by Azure AD after authenticating the user. It's not unusual to add additional attributes such as a group membership from another enterprise directory or a database. Maverics supports namespacing, so you can say azure.family_name, in this case, for last name, and you can say azure.name for first name. And for this other header, OAM remote user, you can say azure.sub, meaning the ID of the authenticated user. If you had multiple providers here, you could easily reference the provider and then reference the attribute name to pass into any header you'd like to configure. Finally, the app gateway supports a range of policies, from very simple to highly complex policies. This policy example here is very simple. It's defining the root resource and all the resources under the root, and then instructing Maverics to allow any user authenticated by Azure AD to access that application. So in our case, the Sonar Systems application. So now comes the fun part. It's time for Maverics to decommission or sunset Oracle Access Manager. So what we're going to do is we're going to log into the admin console here in the live system. And you can see that the server is in an OK health status and it's running. We're going to shut down Oracle Access Manager because we don't need it anymore. We click Force Shutdown Now, then click on Yes, and you can see Force Suspending. It's shutting down the server, and now the state is in a shutdown state, which means the server itself is not reachable, which is a good way to show how things behave once OAM is gone. Okay, so now we're going to see how Maverics uses the abstraction layer once more, this time accessing Sonar Systems, leveraging an app gateway, using Azure Active Directory without OAM in the picture. As you can see, Maverics delegates the authentication request to Azure AD, and Alan Adkins is able to log into Sonar Systems, even though Oracle Access Manager has been decommissioned. Okay, now that was a lot, so let's review what we just demonstrated. First, you saw just-in-time user migration from a legacy identity system to the new identity system. You saw Maverics perform the session abstraction to manage access to the protected legacy application. Then you saw the dynamic access policy capabilities via Maverics' service extensions. And finally, you saw an app run seamlessly after the legacy system was decommissioned. As you saw, the user experience was unchanged and the app was completely unchanged as well. In our example, we used OAM and Azure, but as we discussed earlier in the demo, Maverics is completely platform agnostic and flexible. That means you can use Maverics to modernize and abstract just about any legacy or modern identity system. So that concludes today's demo. Please reach out to us with any questions at sales@strata.io or sign up to get a personalized demo on strata.io/demo. Ask about Strata's Express 3-day proof of concept option to see Maverics work in your environment with your apps. We at Strata look forward to helping you modernize your identity infrastructure and move to the future of multi-cloud. Thanks.